What will it take to get Myles Garrett to New England? We examine Garrett along with all of the other potential Patriots trade targets here on PatsCast.
The Pats got space, the Pats got picks. Locked and loaded, time to make it click. Vrabel's calling, McDaniel's too.
Welcome to PatsCast. I'm Brad Whitaker. Good to be with you. I think us Patriots fans, we're all pretty excited about the 2025 season. Seems like the grown-ups are back in the room, very happy with Mike Vrabel's coaching staff. Sounds like he wanted Josh McDaniels, at least according to Greg Bedard, so that wasn't a craft hire. Excited about Terrell Williams. Excited that Dante Scarnecchia may be joining the staff as a consultant for the offensive line coaches, and Doug Marrone there. Lots of potential for this Patriots team, but in all honesty, they're not going to go anywhere unless they get some talent this offseason. And as much as we talk about drafting and developing talent, I'll be honest, I do not have a ton of confidence in Elliott Wolf. Yes, I know, he's well regarded around the league. I think more highly of Elliott Wolf than most Patriots fans based off of what other people are saying. But from the eye test, Drake May, yes, slam dunk, home run, but he did fall in your lap. All the other draft picks from last year, Elliott Wolf either missed on or these are guys we're still waiting to hear from. So trades should be a heavy consideration for the Patriots, especially with all that they have to work with in terms of draft capital, in terms of salary cap space. And yeah, we can sit here and talk about free agency, which we will on this podcast, plenty. But the truth is, yeah, it sounds great on paper. We're just going to throw all the money at the world at T. Higgins, and he's going to come to New England. We're going to throw all the money in the world at Ronnie Stanley to play left tackle for the Patriots and leave Baltimore. Sounds great on paper, but in reality, these guys, free agents, have to make the decision to go to the Patriots. The great thing about trades is you can just force them to come to New England. And that's why I think the Patriots front office, right now they have all 7 draft picks plus an additional 3rd round pick. I think they're going to move some of these picks and potentially bring in some of these big names because talent-wise, we know the Patriots are lacking and they really only need a couple of big moves here to turn this from like a borderline, 7-9 team, which they probably are now, or 7-10 team, to a team that can actually be a playoff contender just by adding a couple of talented pieces to this roster. So why don't we go through this list that I've put together, and I'm curious to hear from you in the comments if there's anyone that I missed or anyone that you would like to see the Patriots target, someone that's under the radar. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments who else you would like to see added to this list. But we'll start with wide receivers, and the guy at the top of everyone's list is A.J. Brown. Now, a lot will depend on Sunday's outcome in the Super Bowl. If the Eagles lose, maybe that means Brown will want to leave. We know he hasn't been happy with Jalen Hurts as his quarterback. If they win, maybe he just wants to move on. We got the championship, or maybe he'll want to stay. A lot could depend on how Sunday goes, but there's been talk about A.J. Brown and his great relationship that he has with Mike Vrabel. Vrabel obviously drafted A.J. Brown, was their top receiver, and was not happy when his GM traded him away to the Philadelphia Eagles. Well, A.J. Brown, still only 27 years old, and he, the numbers he puts up, they speak for themselves. He has over 80 receptions per season on average, 86.5. Averages nearly 1,300 yards per season and almost 10 touchdowns. And he's under contract with the Eagles through 2026, so has a couple more seasons, but his cap hit increases every single year of those 2 years on the contract, making this a real trade possibility. Not just because Brown is frustrated with Hurts or that he's spoken out about his frustration with the Eagles organization. This is a Super Bowl contending team. They could win the Super Bowl on Sunday. They're going to have to move some pieces to create cap space so they can have a little bit more longevity there. A.J. Brown makes that pretty easy. And look, we know A.J. Brown wanted to be drafted by the Patriots while Tom Brady was there. We know his relationship with Mike Vrabel. It seems like an obvious fit. Now, what will that take for the Patriots? I think they'd probably have to give up their 2nd round pick if they're going to get a player like A.J. Brown, and maybe a future draft pick or a mid-round pick. Not the 4th overall pick because, you do only have Brown under contract for a couple more years, and he's not 25 or 24. He's 27. He's heading toward that 30 mark. So, he's not as valuable as if, he was under a 4-year contract and was 25 years old. Patriots probably wouldn't have to give up the 4th overall pick to get A.J. Brown, but I could be wrong. We'll see. Another guy who kind of falls into that A.J. Brown category, that big-bodied boundary wide receiver, is DK Metcalf. Now, of course, DK said on a podcast, I think it was last week, that he does not want to play for the Patriots, but you trade for him, he doesn't have much of a choice. And similar to A.J. Brown, he's under contract with the Eagle through 2026 with an ever-increasing cap hit. And, you know, he does have, or actually, I'm wrong about that. He's under contract for just one more year. So 2025 season, meaning he is a one-and-done candidate. So the Patriots aren't going to trade, you know, a 1st and a 3rd round pick for Metcalf. They only have him for a year, but, you know, you could maybe give up the 2nd round pick if that's too high, too low of a price for the Eagles for A.J. Brown. Maybe it's the right price for a guy like DK Metcalf, whose numbers are comparable, right? Like he's going to have a little bit less in terms of receptions, averages about 76 per season, usually is over the 1,000-yard mark, and has a tick under 9 touchdowns on average per season. So, you know, he would bring something to the Patriots offense that they really haven't had since Randy Moss. You know, doesn't have the speed of Randy Moss. Same can be said about A.J. Brown, but just having that tall, turn 50-50 balls into 80-20 balls, DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, slam dunks if you can get him, and I don't think you have to give up a 1st round pick to get those guys. Then there's T. Higgins. Yeah, I know, we were talking about T. Higgins, the free agent, but he might be available for trade because the Bengals could sit there and say, we don't want to lose him for nothing. We'll tag him like we did last year, give him the franchise tender, and then we'll trade him and see if we can get, hypothetically, a 2nd or 3rd round pick in return. Of course, in order for the Patriots to make that trade, T. Higgins would have to agree to sign a contract extension because you're not going to give up valuable draft picks for a guy that's only going to be there a year in what is likely going to be a rebuilding year. So T. Higgins, you know, he's only 26 years old. You know, he's not going to be a high-volume receiver, just north of 60 receptions. That's what you can expect from him. Probably just under 1,000 yards per season and around 6 touchdowns. But, you know, I don't put him in the same category as A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf. But if you can't get him as a free agent, it's worth talking to the Bengals about a sign-and-trade type option. Of course, if you can get him as a free agent, you know, you shouldn't have to trade for him in a sign-and-trade. He would have to agree to go to New England in the first place. So I think the idea of the Patriots trading for T. Higgins is very slim. I think it's more likely he comes as a free agent. But in all likelihood, he doesn't want to go to the Patriots because they are not a contender at this moment in time, and they have to play in the cold weather Northeast. And then there's Garrett Wilson with the New York Jets. Now, I think this is highly unlikely that the Jets are to trade their young 24-year-old superstar wide receiver to their division rival, the New England Patriots. Highly unlikely, but they are shifting into rebuilding mode. It seems Wilson could be on the trade block. We don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to be back. If I had to guess, I don't think he will be. You have a guy there who's going to give you 70 catches, 1,000 yards, 5 to 8 touchdowns a season, and also just the spectacular catch radius, his playmaking ability. You know, he might be the most talented receiver on this list, just in terms of not necessarily raw physical traits, but in terms of skill level. Garrett Wilson could be that guy. So, you know, you're going to have to give up a lot to get him. He is under contract, though, just for one more season, so you may not have to give up quite as much, but he is eligible for a 5th-year option, and, you know, 5th-year options do get expensive, so you're essentially getting him for 2 years. You want to sign him long-term if you're going to make that trade. Patriots at least would have to give up a 2nd-round pick, I think, for Garrett Wilson. Is the 4th overall pick in that conversation? I think you probably use that in the draft. I think there's really only one player on this list I would trade the 4th overall pick for. But Garrett Wilson is close. And to get a wide receiver like that, that's going to be impactful right away in his mid-20s, not even pushing 27, 28, it's a no-brainer. I just don't see the Jets doing it. And then a slightly less talented wide receiver that could potentially be available, Chris Olave with the New Orleans Saints. He's also only 24 years old, was actually drafted 11th overall he was 11th overall in the 2022 NFL draft, and Garrett Wilson was 10th overall in the 2022 NFL draft. stats are very similar. They're comparable. Maybe you'll get about 100 yards less per season, 1 or 2 touchdowns less from Olave, but still one of the more talented young receivers in the game. I don't see it happening. The only reason I think the Saints would put him on the trade block is because they do have a new head coach. Kellen Moore, it sounds like he's going to be the head coach of the Saints. Maybe they just want to rebuild altogether, but this is the kind of player you're going to want to rebuild with because he is only 24 years old, like Garrett Wilson, and Mickey Loomis is still the GM there. He's been the GM for like 24 years now. That doesn't seem like the type of move he would make, so I don't expect Olave to be available, but that's a guy to keep in mind going forward. Last but not least, at wide receiver, we do know the LA Rams intend on trading him this offseason. Cooper Kupp. Now, he's 32 years old, so the production that you're going to get out of him, it's probably only going to regress going forward. But you think about Cooper Kupp and you think about Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator, he's going to get a lot of production out of him, and he's going to be able to sustain him late in his career and make sure he gets the most value out of him. So I think this might be, most of these trade candidates are reaches. Even A.J. Brown with the relationship with Mike Vrabel, it's still a pipe dream at this point. I think Cooper Kupp is actually realistic. And, you look at his season numbers. These are his averages, so it's not going to be the same, but around 80 catches a year, around 1,000 yards per season, around 7 touchdowns per season. Probably not going to hit those numbers at this point in his career, but Josh McDaniels can ignite the light a little bit longer, if you will. So I think Cooper Kupp could be a real solid trade candidate there. Josh McDaniels, he can't get enough of the slot receivers. You pair him with Demario Douglas. We saw what Cooper Kupp did against the Patriots this past year. I think actually the Patriots shut him down for the most part, but he did have a few big plays. But this is the most realistic choice on this list. I think you're probably at most going to have to give up a 3rd-round pick for him. Maybe a 4th-round pick is possible, but look, we know they need talent in that receiving room, and if you can't get the big boundary X guy like a Metcalf or an A.J. Brown, get Cooper Kupp, get a veteran in that room, and at least he'll help with the development of guys like Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Kayshon Boutte, and maybe it will uplift that receiving core a little bit more and make life a little bit easier for Drake May and Josh McDaniels. Now, the most important unit, however, is not wide receiver. It is the offensive line. It has been the Patriots' greatest weakness for the past 3 seasons now. They really have done very little to address it in recent years. They got a bridge tackle last year who played about half a quarter before quitting on the team and quitting on his NFL career, Chuks Okorafor. They drafted Caden Wallace thinking they could move him to right tackle over to left tackle. Turns out they can't, and he was hurt most of the season. And maybe he has a future at right tackle, but that's uncertain. Leighton Robinson was drafted. I think, he might have a positive future there, but, I said the same thing about Sidney So a year ago, and he regressed. So Patriots are going to need to add some talent to this offensive line, particularly at the tackle positions. I'm really not that worried about guard or center. You got Mike Onwenu at right guard. You got David Andrews coming back at center, and potentially 2 solid backups with Cole Strange and Ben Brown if you want him to return. And the left guard, you just put the best player out there. Cole Strange, Leighton Robinson, Sidney So, whoever's the best player available, a guy you pick up in free agency, some guy is going to be competent enough to play that position. So I'm not as worried about guard, so I'm going to focus more on the tackle positions here because the Patriots do need to fill both of those spots. At the very least, so you can put depth behind Caden Wallace, but I don't think Wallace is going to be ready. So let's start with Jack Conklin of the Cleveland Browns. Now, this guy is a proven right tackle. He is 30 years old. You're going to have to draft some offensive linemen, but I think adding starting veterans is the right approach this year in terms of long-term development for the younger players that you have on that staff, or on that player roster. Jack Conklin is going to be a good enough right tackle, right? He was drafted 8th overall in 2016 by the Titans. Does tend to play full seasons for the most part, averages about 13 games per season. That's important for offensive linemen. And on average, he only allows about 3.5 sacks per season. So he's under contract through 2026. You probably would have to give up a 3rd-round pick for a guy like Jack Conklin. I would do that in a second to shore up the right tackle position, and maybe you address left tackle in free agency or in the 1st round of the draft. Jack Conklin, a great choice. An even better choice is Colton Miller, the left tackle for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's only 28 years old, so a veteran, but still with a few more years. Raiders, they're kind of in a rebuild right now. I guess they are in a rebuild, and they're perhaps going to be looking to free up some cap space or accumulate draft picks. Miller, as most of you know, was the 15th overall pick in the 2018 draft. Plays almost 15 games a season, allows 4.2 sacks per season, which isn't bad for a left tackle. But he's only under contract for a year. So if you're going to make that trade, that's probably going to be a second-round pick, and you have to have the guarantee that he's going to sign long-term. But, Colton Miller is going to be expensive for the Raiders. We'll see if that's a guy they're willing to shop. You do have the relationship with Tom Brady now, with ownership, and Elliott Wolf, there's a lot of connections there between New England and Las Vegas these days. Maybe that's a possibility, but you are trading him in conference, and maybe the Raiders wouldn't want to do that. Not many teams trade 28-year-old, veteran, talented, ascending left tackles. So, probably not going to happen, but you have a chance at him, go get him. And last but not least, and I don't love this idea, but he is only 24 years old, Evan Neal. He is the right tackle / left tackle for the New York Giants. He was selected 7th overall in 2022 and just has not worked out. He's been an absolute disaster, but he's under contract through 2026. He's eligible for a 5th-year option if you can make it work out. You wouldn't have to trade, I don't think, a 2nd or 3rd round pick for him. You could probably get him for a 4th, 5th, or a 6th because he has largely been a failure. He's not a plug-and-play, obviously, but you have Dante Scarnecchia coming back as a consultant for that offensive line coaching staff. You have Doug Marrone coming there. And let's be honest, Evan Neal, as bad as he's been with the New York Giants, there's still a lot of potential there. And he would have been starting for the New England Patriots this season. So you don't have to give up a lot. It's a risk because maybe he won't develop into anything, but there is still some real potential there. And for the most part, he stays healthy, right? He plays 14 and a half games per season. A lot of potential, a lot of challenges so far, but Evan Neal is worth considering, even if you hear his name and you go, I think that's a bad idea. I'm not sure he's a long-term option, but he might be. He might be if you can develop him in the ways that the New York Giants can't, and I wouldn't trust last year's coaching staff, but Doug Marrone and Dante Scarnecchia popping in from time to time with all that he did with the Patriots dynasty for 20-plus years. Scarnecchia, I mean, you remember what he did with the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football when the Patriots lost in 2014. Basically, because their offensive line was a disaster, he had it fixed in a week. Dante Scarnecchia did. He gave Brady a little extra help with tight ends, with running backs, chipping the edge rushers. He fixed it in a week, and they blew out the Cincinnati Bengals, who were undefeated. That's what Dante Scarnecchia can do, and that's something the Patriots haven't had on that coaching staff. Now, he is like 136 years old, so who knows how impactful he'll be, but the fact that he'll still be around Gillette Stadium makes me think trading for a guy like Evan Neal, if it's not going to cost too much, that might be the right choice. Now, moving to the defensive side of the football, I'm going to start with Jeffrey Simmons, defensive tackle for the Tennessee Titans. We know they're in a bit of a rebuild right now, and certainly he's going to get expensive. He already is expensive. He is signed through 2026. Cap hit's going to be escalating. That's a good defensive tackle. Not sure the Titans would want to give him up. He is kind of first-round trade material. Not 4th overall pick, but for a guy like Jeffrey Simmons, you're probably giving up a future first-round pick for a guy like that, which, look, I told you at the top of this podcast how I feel about Elliott Wolf. I'm not super confident. Hey, maybe he won't even be back next year, but, you know, a future first-round pick, yeah, you're mortgaging the future, but a guy like Jeffrey Simmons would be a big deal. 27 years old, averages 5.5 sacks per season and 41 tackles per season. But another guy who I might actually be willing to trade the 4th overall pick, and certainly a future first-round pick, would be Max Crosby with the Las Vegas Raiders. Same age as Jeffrey Simmons. He's obviously a defensive end. Sims is a defensive tackle, but has more than has pretty much double the sacks. 10.5 sacks on average per season. Over 70 tackles on average per season. Max Crosby, arguably a top 3 defensive end in the NFL. He is 4th overall pick trade consideration. Under contract through 2026. You would want to extend him if you were able to make this move, but Patriots have all the cap space in the world. They have the most in the NFL. You make a move for a guy like Max Crosby and even consider moving the 4th overall pick and a mid-round pick if you can bring him in there. Not saying he's going to be available via trade, but that's a guy to keep in mind. There's also Trey Hendrickson. He's getting up there in age. He's at 30 years old now with the Bengals, but Cincinnati is dealing with a tough salary cap situation. You know, we talked about T. Higgins. He'll be gone in all likelihood. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase down the road. Joe Burrow's on an expensive contract. Hendrickson, looks like he's under contract just through next season, so you would have to trade for him with the idea that you're going to extend him. Now, he wouldn't cost as much. I think the Patriots could potentially get him for a 2nd-round pick or maybe even a 3rd, considering he's only under contract for 1 more year, and be willing to take the cap hit, which the Patriots can and the Bengals cannot. Trey Hendrickson, a good veteran option if you don't want to spend like crazy for a guy like Max Crosby. Yeah, I'll take him. I'll take him, definitely. Especially if he's not that expensive and a guy who's going to work really well with Mike Vrabel. Take him in a second. But last but not least, Myles Garrett. He's the guy who has requested a trade with the Cleveland Browns. Now, he has said the reason he's requesting a trade is not because he wants to go to Cooperstown. It's because he wants to win Super Bowls. Patriots are not on the radar of high-end players, at least as of right now, as a Super Bowl contender. That said, you could still trade for him. You just need him to sign long-term if that were the case. Obviously, he's being paid a ton, has a significant cap hit, but, arguably the best defensive player in the NFL. Shoe-in, future Hall of Famer, drafted 1st overall, 2017 NFL draft, averages about 13 sacks a season, about 55 tackles. Cleveland, they have the chance to replace him pretty quickly if they draft Abdul Carter. I don't think Abdul Carter will ever be as good as Myles Garrett, even if he is like one of the 2 blue chip prospects in this draft. Myles Garrett is one of the greatest ever to play the position, and he is approaching 30 years old, so that brings his trade value down just slightly, but you have to give up the 4th overall pick and maybe even a future 1st-round pick, or you're going into the 3rd round, and you have an extra 3rd round, so that's what this kind of trade is for. But you can bring in Myles Garrett, sign him long-term. Think about what that would open up for the Patriots defense. Think about how every offense in the league, every offensive coordinator is going to have to plan and do something about Myles Garrett. Put extra attention on Myles Garrett. Double team, double block Myles Garrett. Think about what that opens up for other opportunities for the defense. Think what Mike Vrabel could do with a guy like Myles Garrett. Patriots need to shoot their shot at this one, and if that involves giving up this year's 4th overall pick and next year's 1st-round pick, hey, I'll take it for arguably the best pass rusher in the game and a guy that is going to continue to perform at a high level for at least another 4 seasons, in my opinion, and potentially longer. I mean, that is a position where there isn't a lot of longevity, but a guy like Myles Garrett, the way he's still performing, I think he got at least 4 more All-Pro, Pro Bowl caliber years out of him. So he would be the guy you want, and I'd be willing to trade the world for Myles Garrett. And the Patriots, unlike most teams in the NFL, have the cap space to make a move like that, sign him long-term, and give him a red jacket. Which, if Myles Garrett makes it onto the Patriots, he's going to get a red jacket down the road. He finishes his career in New England, plays another 5 seasons, he'll get the red jacket, and I'm not saying he's going to win a Super Bowl, but he'll get the Patriots moving in the right direction very quickly, and I think this is a playoff team easily next year with Myles Garrett, and if you can shore up the offensive line, sky's the limit. Another name just came across my mind, he's not on my list, is TJ Watt. Very valuable to the Steelers, but he would be a potential favorite to land if he becomes available. We know he's capable of multiple All-Pro selections, averages 16 sacks a year, 70 tackles a season. His contract only runs for another year, and he has a big cap hit, so I think TJ Watt is another consideration. I just don't think the Steelers are going to want to trade him. They'll be willing to pay a franchise player like TJ Watt, so that seems unlikely. What's realistic here? I think the most realistic options are A.J. Brown, because of the relationship with Mike Vrabel, Cooper Kupp, because you're not going to have to trade a lot for him. He's 32 years old, and he fits very well with what Josh McDaniels likes to do. On the offensive line, I think Evan Neal is realistic because he's not going to cost you much of anything. And maybe not so much Colton Miller, but perhaps Jack Conklin would be available via trade. So he's a possibility. And then in terms of defensive players, maybe Myles Garrett, because we know he's going to be available via trade. But I put Trey Hendrickson in there just because of his age and also the fact you're not going to have to pay a lot for him. But curious to hear from you. Is there anyone here that I missed at these key positions of need? Defensive line, offensive line, wide receiver, that you think the Patriots should go after this offseason as a trade target? I'm not talking about free agents. I'm talking about trade targets. Curious to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments below. And be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Going to be a lot. We're in kind of a lull right now. There hasn't been a lot of podcasts coming out over the last few weeks because we are in that pre-draft, pre-free agency lull. But there's going to be a lot more content coming out in the coming weeks and months. You're not going to want to miss it. Be sure to subscribe.
The Pats got space, the Pats got bits. Locked and loaded, time to make it click. Vrabel's calling, McDaniels too. Who's the next star rocking red, white, and blue? AJ Brown, DK Speed. T. Higgins flying, that's what we need. Garrett Wilson, Coop 2. Tell me, Elliott, what moves would you do? Step for a trade, ready to go. Who's coming to Foxborough? Load up the roster, set the stage. The Patriots are back, time to engage. O-line needs muscle, trenches need grit. Jack Conklin solid, Colton fits. Myles Garrett, bring in the heat. Max Crosby, put them on their feet. Draft's coming, the war room's live. One big move, keep the dream alive. Who's the weapon for young Drake May? Build it right, we're here to stay. Stack for a trade, ready to go. Who's coming to Foxborough? Load up the roster, set the stage. The Patriots are back, time to engage.